Father Jim Martin, Jesuit author, editor-at-large of American Magazine, is here to be our MC, our guest host, if you will. And then we're very excited to have with us Sister Helen Prejean. So I'm going to invite them up and let Father Jim take things over.
You got a good cake.
Oh my gosh, that's yeah.
What are you holier than now? You're not drinking. This is a happy hour. Oh no, that's good.
Go ahead, you can drink. Begin. There's plenty of room in the front. Why don't we take a moment to quiet ourselves down and, I was just reminded that this is the 35th anniversary of the martyrdom of the church women in El Salvador. And so why don't we just take a moment and call them to mind and ask their intercession for us as we begin our evening with a wonderful church woman right here. So let's just ask God to be with us. Loving God, we thank you for bringing us together tonight. We thank you for the gift so much of companionship and food and nourishment. We know that you nourish us in many ways. You nourish us with one another, with food, with the Eucharist. You also nourish us with the examples of people like the 4 church women who were martyred and gave their lives in service to your Son. Help us as we enter into this weekend to be as open to the Spirit as they were and as generous as they were with their lives. And we ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So I am very happy to be here with Sister Helen Prejean, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. She is...
And I'm worried because you said it was funny. Who thinks it's funny makes me nervous.
There's a serious one. There's a serious one, and then... So Sister Helen Prejean is the sister of St. Joseph of Madai, and she is the world's, I think we can say, leading advocate to end the death penalty. Something that, as you know, Pope Francis talked about during his visit to Congress. She also accompanies men and women on death row and in various states and advocates for them. And she really is, I'm going to embarrass her, one of my heroes. So we're very happy to welcome Sister Helen Prejean.
Do I get to say something nice about
Not
you?
yet. No, not yet. She's also a good friend, and I thought we'd begin in a lighthearted way. Sister Helen, there was a movie recently starring Susan Sarandon as a nun working on death row.
It was 20 years ago.
20 years ago. And we were wondering if that was what inspired you to begin your work. And then
Susan is my inspiration. She is.
And then someone told me that there was even a book that came out of the movie, too. So,
Yeah. So then I said, let me write a book.
So, more seriously, I'd like to ask you, really a question that's been on my mind for a while. Why does, and this is very sincere, why does it seem, when it seems so clear to most of us in this room, that the death penalty is wrong because it offends the idea of human dignity, why do you think that it's still hard for some Catholics to get there? What is it that you think prevents them from really kind of getting to that point where they understand that?
Well, it's the same thing that prevents most Americans from getting there. It's just not deep reflection on it. It's a surface soul thing. they did a terrible crime, they deserve to die. If you don't reflect on something and get close to it, and actually something Justice Anthony Kennedy said recently in a case where he's raising concerns about solitary confinement, and he was talking about the public, and he said, is it ignorance or indifference about what the torture that's going on in solitary confinement of all these people? And the ignorance and indifference, they go together, because if you don't really know what's going on and see the suffering, you've got to be able to see the suffering. But see, we have these little switches we turn. Oh, that's a criminal. They're in prison. They did crimes. We need to be safe from them. And the other thing is we're made to be afraid, see. So they're prisoners, they're criminals, they deserve to be punished. End of reflection. And the way we reflect deeply is through spirituality, through education, and then some dynamite people making good movies, you know, and American Magazine, which helps everybody reflect deeply, because it's Jesuitical.
Of course. In the best way. But you know, in terms of the Catholic world, we have been so well educated, and I think people here would agree with this, and not just people in this room, and not just people who are interested in social justice, but there's been such an emphasis on human dignity, the dignity of all life, the dignity of life from natural conception to natural death, that I think it really does surprise me that people are able to somehow shut that out. And it's, do you run into Catholics who are, in a sense, you know, pro-life from cradle to grave, who have this, is it that they have an exception for these people because they're not?
Because they're not innocent. That's a really big thing. Because unborn babies, innocent, people with Alzheimer's, you know, when we take a stand against euthanasia, physician-assisted suicide, we talk about innocent life. But boy, when you cross that line, when someone has done a terrible crime, and we all struggle with this. This isn't just some Catholics we're talking about. This is when people do an outrageous crime, you know, we feel that outrage within ourselves. So we just think that a different criteria applies to them. Then, too, about Catholics, let me tell you this interesting statistic. In 1996, and I remember that date because that's when the movie A Dead Man Walking went wide. But in 1996, they took a poll. And Americans, 78% of Americans supported the death penalty. And 80% of Catholics. Now that's a bad statistic. And the more Catholics went to church, the more they believed in the death penalty. So what does that tell you? That when people are going to Mass, going to Eucharist, they're not hearing about the death penalty when you hear about dignity of life. They're hearing about other moral issues where dignity is associated, but certainly not with criminals or people on the margins, as Jim Martin is pushing on that shirt. You're pushing T-shirts now. Go.
Yes, this is American Magazine.
Yes, I want to suggest Jim Martin is the margin.
That's true.
He's margin on himself. And, comes to the margins, your shirt should say on the back. Well, wait, back to the Catholics.
Back to the Catholics.
One of the things that happened, and this is what Pope Francis is teaching us through the Synod, it is dialogue. It is dialogue. People actually talking to each other and saying, let me tell you what happened to me, let me tell you what I saw. And that's what's so great about the Jesuit volunteers. You go into places, you have been on the margins. And that's how we learn. And that dialogue is going on in the Catholic Church. And my image of dialogue is when you put a pot to boil, you start at the bottom of the pot and you have all these little bitty bubbles. You never just have one great big fat bubble, and you call that dialogue. It starts at the bottom of the pot through people's experience and it bubbles up. And so it's been to the bishops, it's been through magazines, through our getting articles out, through journalists, through activists like myself and others that work. And then people begin getting, oh, I didn't know it was like that. That's what most people say after I go to give a talk. I was just in a church in Indiana last night. And at the end of it, and I invite people to read the book, because when you read, You're quiet, you don't have to debate, you can go to deep places in your own soul. And you don't have to be defensive at all. And what most people say is, I didn't know it was like that. Because you take them through the execution, you take them through the victim's family. And what would it take to heal a family who lost a loved one to terrible violence? And they get it. You gotta just bring it to them, though. You gotta bring it close so that they can experience it, and they get it.
So it's your experience that stories have a way of opening up people's minds in a way that maybe
You heard
art
that too
imitation.
about the story thing?
So
how
I've heard.
important they
So
are?
I've heard.
Yes.
But they are. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
like the parables. I mean, they kind of open up people's minds. What the other thing I'm curious about, and you're the expert on this. Can you take us through what's been happening to? I think this is very confusing for a lot of Catholics. Official Catholic teaching, because I know that, for example, the Catechism seems to have gotten tighter. Isn't that right in terms of the permissibility of the death penalty? Is that accurate? Can you tell us what
There's a whole story about that.
Yeah, please.
Catholic Catechism. But first, can I just say a little bit about the story?
Please.
Because lawyers that are going in to try to save people's lives. How many people we have here are interested in being public defenders? Yes. Yes. For poor people who don't have anybody to represent them, but the lawyers are catching on and they have the training. When you go in for trial, the one who tells the whole story about the client wins the case. And so in my second book, The Death of Innocence, I had the story of Jeremy Gross in Indiana, went to a convenience store, it's all on the video. He shoots the man dead and robs the cat, and the video got it all. And the guy he's shooting is going, why, Jeremy, why? And he's going, bang, bang, bang. He's killing the guy right in front of everybody. And so then he had a lawyer, Bob Hill. And Bob Hill took the initiative. He knew prosecution was going to show that video. The kid obviously has killed somebody in cold blood to rob him. And then he said to them, and now we have seen what Jeremy Gross did when he came in that convenience store. But now I want to tell you the story of Jeremy Gross before he got to that convenience store. And he told about his life in foster homes, told about the abusive parents, had to call the mama and visit her 15 times before she would consent to get on the stand and say publicly she abused her son. And he told that story to the jury, and they unanimously voted that Jeremy Gross ought to be given a chance to live. That's what story does. But when it's not story, like in the trial of Johar Sarnaev, I was part of that, to try to speak to the jury about his humanness and his sorrow for what he had done in the bombing in Boston Marathon. What was the job of the prosecutor? It was to keep the story out about the human being, Johar, and just paint him as a monster who hated Americans, would kill again. He's a jihadist little guy, and he's just going to do it again, so you have to kill him. So story is just really, really important. Catholic Catechism, you know that's the last thing to change, is the doctrine. The experience of the people. Same thing happened with slavery. You know, because I live in Louisiana, and you can see the plantation houses, and the white people would all go to the Catholic Church for Mass, and the slaves were given a day off on Sunday, and they'd go to their churches, but everybody supported slavery. How did that change? It changed because people walking through, like New Orleans was a big auction place when they would bring them in. And you know, you're walking through the town square and there's a mother being separated from her children. It's all legal. Nobody questions it, and that's what culture does. It just says, well, this is what we do. People began to question, and then finally, and those bubbles were coming up in the pot, and it came up within the Catholic Church as well. And then we took a moral stance that we were against slavery. It's the way anything changes. But the last thing to change is what you write in the book.
Well, and it also seems that, I mean, we're moving so close, given that the Pope called for global abolition of the death penalty to Congress, which seems to me to be a pretty high level of teaching. I mean, that he seems to have put
That Jim Martin is really sharp.
Oh, how about that?
I mean, that's a high level of teaching for the Congress and the entire world, and to call for the global abolition. I mean, that's really good.
So thank you very much. So, nothing gets by me.
So fantastic, by the way. You talk about bubbles coming up in the pot a long, long, long time for that moment. But we have a Pope, oh my God, he's such a miracle, who feels for people and recognizes the suffering. That was a moment, such a moment.
Can you tell us, now recently, for anyone that's been following Sister Helen in the news or on social media knows that she's been accompanying people recently, some very difficult cases. Can you tell us, maybe for those who aren't familiar with who you've been working with lately, some of their stories and who you've been sort of raising up?
Maybe one person.
Sure.
Richard Glossip. Y'all heard that name? Glossip. It looks like gossip, but it has an L in it. Richard Glossip from Oklahoma. How many hands on this do you heard of Richard Glossip? Okay, look at this. I get a letter. I get a lot of letters. And it was neat handwriting, very understated, not, over the top. Help me, I'm innocent. This sweet little guy wrote this letter, and I wrote him back. I can't answer all the letters. Sister Margaret helps me, and Carolyn, we work in the office to write back. But did somebody set me up with a phone call to Richard Glossip? And this is what I heard on the phone. I mean, this bridges thing, look at these connections. Bridges are just connections, and some of them are fire connections that connect us to each other. And he goes, Sister Helen, I hope you don't mind. I didn't ask your permission or anything, but I just put you down to be with me if I'm executed. I'm innocent, Sister Helen, but I think they're really going to kill me here. They're trying real hard to kill me, and I just put your name down. I hope you don't mind. I get in bed that night. There's in Psalm 81 a line that said, unseen, I answered you in thunder. You ever had that happen here? Unseen, I answered you in thunder. And I pop awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there is no way I'm just going to walk with this guy who's innocent while Oklahoma kills him, that we have to do everything we can. So I called up the woman who inspired me to write the book and who did that movie. I called up Susan Sarandon because I knew she had come to pursue our theme.
That's right, very good.
Because she and Robert Redford had done a series of stories on CNN called Death Row Stories about innocent people. We've had 156 innocent people who were lucky enough to get freed off the death row because they were saved by innocence projects of college volunteers. People like you doing it. And I called up Susan. I said, Susan, there's this guy, Richard Glossip. It's just like the word gossip, but it has an L in it. And I said, he's innocent as the day is long. I've already started looking into his case. In Oklahoma, you got to have the right chemistry. You got to have a rabid DA who goes for the death penalty, and Cowboy Bob Macy in Oklahoma County. They have gotten 54 death penalties in his little pocket. You got to have a bad or totally inadequate defense so the truth can't come out at trial. And you have to have an innocent person like Richard Glossip, who's so innocent he's naive about what's going to happen to him. And that's how you get innocent people going to death row, and he's a prime example. Everything depended on the word of this little guy, Justin Sneed. It was just a 19-year-old kid. He was a bad meth addict. And you can see in the videos how BMO and Cook, police detectives, working with Bob Macy, throw into the conversation about Richard Glossip putting Justin Sneed up to it. He had gone to rob a man, he killed him. He admitted it to them, but they introduced Richard into the conversation and into the confession, threatened this 19-year-old kid with the death penalty, and then he sees a way out of getting the death penalty. if he tells them what they want to hear. And so he goes along and he said, yeah, Richard Glossip put me up to it, yeah. And then we said we'd rob him and split the money. And so you have a murder for hire. Bob Macy has the aggravating circumstance he needs for a death penalty. Justin Sneed goes to a medium security prison, which he's serving today, as they say, a long sentence on a soft yard. Because if you had to go to prison, you want to be at Joseph Hart. It's a medium security prison. Who admitted that he murdered the guy. And Richard Glossip was facing death. So we got in there, we started going to the media. Susan got MoveOn.org, we started getting petitions, started calling everybody we knew, and she called Dr. Phil, who almost fainted when he heard Susan Sarandon was going to come on his show. It's not a thing to go on Dr. Phil. And he devoted that whole show. And I mean, he had the number of the governor who dug in her heels and said, we're not listening to all these out-of-state abolitionists coming in. But her number was up there. Dr. Phil goes, and this is the number of Governor America. And write to her, and she's getting this bombardment, and it's making her madder and madder because these out-of-state abolitionists. And finally, in the end, when they're about to execute Richard, all that world attention is what saved his life. He was supposed to be executed 3 times, came close to death. 3 o'clock on September 30th, it gets to be 2:45, I'm there to be with the witnesses. And they didn't kill him at 3, and then we didn't know what was going on. And then at 4:45, they brought us out of the prison. They had mixed up the drugs, only to find out that because of the world's attention on Richard, they didn't dare use this drug, potassium acetate, which is a drug that changes the liquid composition of your blood and like mummifies you. They used to use it for embalming people. And this poor man, Charles Warner, who was executed before Richard, they had used it on him, but they had hidden it and they had lied about it. They were about to give that to him. And when it came out that they were about to use that drug, she stopped the execution because she knew the world was watching Oklahoma. But he lost 60 pounds. He was down in what they call the lower cell. It's all made out of cement near the execution chamber, bright lights. He couldn't sleep. Guards watching him all the time to make sure he doesn't try to commit suicide. And it's torture. We have to expose it for what it is. But he's alive. And now the work of the lawyers, all pro bono, is to find the evidence to impeach the credibility of Justin Sneed and show him as a 19-year-old kid who was under pressure with the death penalty. And then you had a horrible defense of Richard, who didn't, when he had that guy up to cross-examine him. Now, if a Jesuit could have done that, I mean, they would have gotten to the truth, see? But we didn't have a Jesuit lawyer. I mean, and poor Richard, and he could just see what was happening right in front of his eyes, and he says, I'm gonna die for this. And indeed, he almost did. So that's one story of one human being up against it, but we have so many people in prison, and they're there because they're poor, and they couldn't get good defense, and a lot of them are innocent, or they shouldn't be having these really harsh sentences. But anyway.
Well, no, thank you for that. I want to pull out something from that story, which I think might relate to this crowd and to so many Catholics. One of the questions I think a lot of people have is, really what can I do to help, right? How can I help you in your work? And so it's interesting to hear you say you do feel that those petitions and signatory things, they do help. You feel that they do influence people's sort of legislators' decisions and government decisions.
Yeah, no, I mean, whatever state you're in, that's where the real work has to be done, so that you write, well, they bring you stuff, huh? I'll have a little bit of that green cheese.
No, I'm fine. I don't need wine.
I'm fine. No, I'm fine.
But that's interesting.
No, that really makes a difference when they get those calls and those letters in the state legislature. And before we do finish tonight, we're going to bring Jody up here because they're working to end life sentences for juveniles in this country. 2,500 young kids. And Jody's working on it. We want to have her up here if we may. Come on, Jody.
Do you want to talk about your work with us?
If Sister Helen is asking me to, I will.
Yes, of
Oh,
course.
well, yes, I am. With Father's permission.
Feel free.
Thank you, Father. Good evening. I am Jody Kenley, the Director of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. My organization works to end the practice of sentencing children to die in prison. We're the only country in the world that sentences our children to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Sister Helen mentioned, there are 2,500 of them here, and Sister Helen inspired me to do this work. Back at Boston College, we were going to be BC alums here.
They're busy.
That's right. I read her book and watched her movie, and it was just a life-changing experience for me to see her walking with these people who everyone else has discarded. I just want to tell everyone in this room that if you ever have the opportunity to go to a prison, and it sounds crazy, you should do it. As Sister Helen said, you know, being there, standing on the margins, as Father Greg Boyle inspired us and Jesuit volunteered for. I know we have JDs in the room, former JDs. There's nothing like it to stand with these people, to meet these people, to hear their stories. They all have stories. And the young people who've been sentenced to die in prison in the United States, the vast majority of them have been exposed to trauma and violence as children. They haven't had the opportunities that many of us in this room have had. And as a result, they have made grave mistakes. The vast majority of the people that we advocate for were convicted of murder as teens. And they have grave consequences. And we work with the victims' families in large part because of Sister Helen and the work that she has done. My organization has worked with a number of victims' families around the country. We've learned a ton from them about forgiveness, about healing, and it's extraordinary what these people are advocating for alongside us to make sure that these young people get a second chance. So for those of you who are going to the Hill on Monday, there is a bill in Congress that addresses this issue, will end life without parole for children at the federal level, SB 2321 or SB 23.
Say that again. Say that again. You say that
It's the Sentencing and Corrections Act, and it's co-sponsored by Senator Grassley and Senator Leahy. There's bipartisan support, which you never get in Washington. But for this bill there is, and we kind of snuck a little provision in there that would end life without parole for children. So we hope that while you guys are up there that you'll mention it. We were blessed with the opportunity to write letters. We actually got letters from 500 juvenile lifers around the country, hand-delivered to the Pope via Father Michael Kennedy, and he responded. Pope Francis responded, and actually posted his letter on your website, so thank you for doing that. So Pope Francis has spoken out about this issue. I mean, it's something that there's a ton of momentum around. States are changing their laws, but there still is just there's still resistance because people don't know. They don't know that we do this to our kids, and they don't know who these kids are. So thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and thanks to all of you guys for caring about these social justice issues. It's the people in this room that are going to change this, and really, we're just grateful to have you walking alongside us and inspiring us.
Jody, how can they get in touch with your organization?
Oh yeah, so the campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth is www.fairsentencingofyouth.org. This is actually, we're coming up on our big week. Next week is our annual convening here in Washington, and we have a reception on Tuesday night. How many of you guys have listened to the podcast Serial?
Oh, yeah.
Hear the breaking news that Adnan is going back into court. He was a juvenile lifer. He is serving life in prison in Maryland, which means he's not going to come up for parole for a crime that he allegedly committed at age 17. So we are actually honoring Rabia Chaudhry at our reception on Tuesday night, along with Jean Bishop, whose sister was tragically murdered by a teenager who was serving life without parole in Illinois. And the formerly incarcerated youth. We have a whole network of formerly incarcerated youth who were in prison for murder and are out now and doing extraordinarily well and are just living examples of why we can't sentence our kids to die in prison. So I welcome you all to come out if you're still in town, and if not, look us up. We've got events and advocacy going on all around the country. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
your
for the
wonderful
service. Forget about the break.
What? Sister, one thing I think that this crowd might be interested in, I'm always interested in your answer to this, and we have so many young people here who we hope will go into social justice work in different ways, either in direct work with the poor or in advocacy. What advice do you have for people who are going into that kind of work who might not see immediate results, for them not to get kind of embittered or discouraged, or even kind of move into despair? How do you keep your sense of hope, and what do you tell people who, work in different kinds of social justice ministries who say, I don't think to see things changing?
Yeah, well, you never do anything. It's a prime principle in the spiritual life, that we do what we do because of the integrity of it. Dan Barrett always says, I do what I do because I cannot not do it. Because once you see something and you see the suffering, so you write to somebody in prison, and you do it for the integrity of it. And I think of it like you put your boat on a little wave and you start riding, and you're in it for the long haul. And we're going to leave this success up to God. You know how Oscar Romero, how he said we plant seeds. So we do it for the integrity, and then we join in community. Lone Rangers don't last long when you do social justice, and that's the beauty of community. We are with other people who are doing it, and because we have ideas and we help each other. And sometimes the particular wave our little boat starts on peters out. And we always have to be alert to, but my heart